thank you for such an insightful and emotive film from both sides. I'm curious, when you set out in making this film, did you think, would we start in America and then go to China? Would we start in China and then go to America? Or did you just let it flow by the people you met? How did it come together?
Should I start? The film was a little bit of a surprise to me, because when I started making the film, I realized very quickly that to make a conventional political film was going to be a big mistake. First of all, it was going to involve a lot of experts, politicians, pundits, academics, professors, and it was going to be a cure for insomnia. So I decided very quickly that that was not the approach, and so we decided collectively that we were going to make what I call an anthropological film. That I approached America and China as if they were two tribes, kind of sitting across a river from each other, staring at each other through the undergrowth, and not quite understanding what was on the other side of the river. Should they row across with presents, with tributes, or should they row across with bows and arrows and weapons? It actually was a very helpful way to approach the subject. The big mistake that I made as a non-Chinese expert, as a layman, was that I thought that I was going to be making this film in America and China. The one big revelation which happened quite early was, once I realized how much China had become a global power, it became very clear to me that if I wanted to tell the story of China, on the Chinese side, we had to travel all over the world. And so that's what we did. We started this film with an 18-month schedule, and it took 5 years. And that's because we went to Africa, we went to the Gulf, we went to the Mediterranean, and of course across America and China. But that was the only way to really tell the story of this relationship. And I certainly don't know whether I succeeded or not. That's for the audience to make up their mind. But it was clear that it was a much bigger and much more important topic than I had actually realized when I embarked on the project.
I would just add this on the subject of China versus the United States. It also became very apparent early on in filming that the Chinese understood an awful lot more about America than America understood about the Chinese. And so as a result of that, as you see in the film, you spend a lot more time demystifying China than we do against demystifying the United States of America.
And also to add just a little bit on the research process. Right now, there's only 3 of us sitting on the stage, but actually there's a team of people working on this film, and we have a team of fantastic researchers and looking for both in China, in the United States, and around the world about these stories. So that's how we select these characters and stories based on the relevance and also whether they can carry an emotional journey for the audience. Hopefully we achieve that, because when you talk about China-US relationship, it's such an abstract concept, and how do you make it engaging, how do you make it emotional, how do you let people feel that they're going through a journey in 1 hour and a half. And hopefully we achieved a little bit of that.
Yeah, and I think related to that, as Malcolm said, we shot this over 5 years. We also shot 850 hours of footage. And winnowing that down to a 92-minute film took a 1.5 years in the editing room. And I have to say, I mean, it was a very difficult process to select the stories, because at the end of the day, we really had an embarrassment of riches. Some great stories, which maybe will turn into something else over time.
First of all, thank you so much to the director and the team. It's such a wonderful movie, very touching. My question is, obviously this movie started 5 years ago. So the political environment was totally different from today, or even a year ago. So do you have the moments that you have to redirect, your cast, redirect your theme? And do you have any setbacks? Or do you have anything, like in the middle you decided to redo anything? Thank you.
It was about 5 years of setbacks. It was a very difficult film to make, actually, and for all kinds of reasons. But I cannot characterize the election of President Trump as a setback, but it was certainly a surprise, and it did mean that we had to kind of recalibrate the film because, of course, we begun under President Obama, and because it went on so long, largely my responsibility for not realizing the kind of enormity of the task. But then President Trump was elected with a very different platform, with a very different approach to China. And of course, we wanted to keep the film contemporary. We needed to reflect that reality, the new reality in Washington. At the same time, we didn't want to completely throw the baby out with the bathwater, so we tried to let President Trump's impact on the film be as light as possible. I mean, one of the interesting things that has happened is that for the last 2 years, all the way through post-production, I was anxious that by the time we got this film finished, it was going to be completely irrelevant. That the events would have taken over, could have rolled over it. Because when you're making it is a political documentary, whether I like to think of it as anthropological in approach or not. It's about two great superpowers. Things happen so quickly. World affairs, political affairs change so rapidly that if you don't get the movie out, you're always in danger of it being completely yesterday's news. We could not have imagined in our wildest dreams that the moment when this film would be kind of the fruit would be ready to be picked and offered to the audience, that what is happening today could have been, the prevailing reality at the time that we were releasing the film. I shot this interview with Bill, for example, where he talks about this being the wrong time, entirely the wrong time to wage a trade war with China. I shot that 3.5 years ago. And, on that level, a tribute to Bill and a tribute to, the thinking behind the film, we kind of knew that this was in the zeitgeist, but we could not have imagined. And that we'd be sitting here today with what's happening around us. And it would be lovely to say that we're super smart and we knew that this is absolute nonsense. We are the recipients of a huge amount of serendipity. Frankly, I still wish it wasn't happening. I still wish we didn't have to deal with this political reality because personally it makes me terribly sad. But it does mean that the film is quite apropos, it's quite contemporaneous. And candidly, every time that the president opens his mouth, he sells our movie for us. I just wish it wasn't that wasn't the prevailing reality. But here we are.
I think I'd just add to that. I think this is very important. The anti-China sentiment existed way before Donald Trump was president. And I don't think we can lose sight of that, because if we do, we'll misdiagnose the problem and we won't find the right solution to the problem. Trump, was certainly capitalized on it politically more than anyone else has. But in a way, he did us a favor because he raised the curiosity level about China to a level where it's really never existed, and it gave us the opening to be able to make a movie like this, where we educate Americans about, what is, this, as Henry Kissinger in his first conversation with Zhou Enlai described as this great land of mystery. And I think the failure of, to a certain extent, of U.S. foreign policy is that it's been for decades predicated on the idea that China would ultimately become, exactly like the United States of America. And because of that, I think the American people never invested the time to really get to understand the complexities of China. Because after all, if we're destined to be ideologically completely compatible, why bother? So that's, I think it's a real opening, for the film.
Thank you for this film. I work at a Chinese language immersion school called Little School and Studios, and one of our biggest priorities is educating Americans about Chinese culture. One of the things I'm most curious about is if you were to film this film again, starting today, are there any changes that you would make, any things or themes that you would focus on differently?
Gosh, that's an awfully good question, which no one has ever asked before. Probably not. I mean, we'd be starting from a different baseline because the political reality is quite different now. The opinion is so polarized in the country and specifically about China-U.S. relations. And but I still think, and I firmly believe that the way to tell this story about these two great nations is not not to allow politicians to get in the way, because politicians exploit differences. That's what their job is, to some extent, a certain kind of politician. And that's terribly saddening, but it is a political reality. I do feel that telling the story of ordinary Chinese and ordinary Americans would be the way to go, because when we examine Xi Jinping has this platform called China Dream, and it's quite interesting. I looked into it quite deeply whilst I was making this film, and one of the things that is the takeaway was that the China Dream would finally, when you get down to basics, is not that dissimilar to the American dream. And I think we all, Americans, Chinese, and probably the rest of the world as well, we all want pretty much the same thing. We want to breathe clean air. We want food in our bellies. We want to live in safety. We want our kids to have a better life than we have had. That's a kind of universal set of values, I think. And the China dream and the American dream are the same, and I think the Chinese are way more similar to Americans than Americans know. And I think our job would still be to try and fill this information deficit, because Americans don't understand China, and the Chinese, because of the success of the American propaganda machine, because of movies and television and the free press and books and newspapers, all that stuff, everyone in the world consumes that stuff because it's great, because the Americans are very good at it. And if I have one little cautionary note for the Chinese need to do the same. They need to be better at telling their own stories, at being proud of what they've achieved. Because in 30 years, what they've achieved is frankly unimaginable. And we don't understand that, and we don't appreciate it, but we also don't understand the price that the Chinese paid for that renaissance. And I think if there was less of an information deficit between the two countries, I think the world would be a much safer and more peaceful place.
I think just to echo that, one of the things Wang Jianlin said that didn't make it into the movie, he said it'll be 10 years before the Chinese economy surpasses the U.S. economy in total size. It'll be 20 to 30 years until the Chinese economy surpasses the American economy in per capita GDP. And it'll be 50 years before China is able to tell a story as well as the United States of America.
Yes.
Good evening, my name is Luis Orunda, I'm the Deputy Secretary of State of Maryland. And in our portfolio, we have our international division, which houses our sister state program, and many are familiar with sister cities. And we take that to the next level and have relationships, currently about 20 all over the world, including the province of Anhui in China. It's been a wonderful relationship. One of the things that I noticed about the film was that I think the term that was used toward the end was unintended diplomats, but I might be accidental diplomats. And while it was a story of two nations, it really, in my mind, was a story of people. And I think that I might suggest, if there's a lot of additional material, and highlighting these stories of people and the relationships. The young man from Texas moving to China, the gentleman that was working in Ethiopia, away from his family for 3 years, and the managers in the plants from China in the U.S., having left for a year. These are things that really, really resonate, I think, much more so than these two superpowers, because in one sense we feel so helpless. I've talked to many of our Chinese friends and diplomats from the embassy, and we often wonder, what can we do? But in one sense, you're telling us what to do.
That's the point.
And so it's just a wonderful story. Again, and I don't want that to get lost in the forest for the trees, or whatever however that saying goes. While it is two superpowers, it's about people and the change agents that we can be.
Thank you. Yes.
And I think the film is a call to action. It's a call to action to the American people, the Chinese people, to become significant stakeholders in what is, without a doubt, the most important bilateral relationship in the world. And obviously we've reached a pivotal inflection point in that relationship. And that means that there's no better time than now to have an informed citizenry. This is what is crucial.
Can I just say, this is a call to action, and one of the important things is to recognize what you can do to get this message out, because we obviously have the goal of having millions of people see this movie in China and in the United States. The trailer went up 72 hours ago, and 1.3 million views have taken place on Facebook, and 12,500 shares. People are already getting ready to spread it around. I mentioned the fact that this coming Friday at the Cinema Village in New York, the movie is going to be screened 3 or 4 times. Similarly in Los Angeles, Malcolm and Yee are going to be in New York, Bill and I are going to be in Los Angeles. And so what we'd like to do is encourage all of you through social media and with the media overall to try and carry the message that we have out there, that seeing this movie is something that can in fact really inspire that call to action that everybody's talking about.
One of the films that sort of inspired, in a way, us to make this film was a film about the environment, Inconvenient Truth, which way outperformed expectations. And I think part of some of the reasons are similar that we think this film has the ability to outperform expectations. When Al Gore ran for president, he ran on an environmental platform, and he created great curiosity amongst the American public. But their base level of knowledge was very low. So you had those the combination of curiosities and a very low level of knowledge. And that created this runaway success, $110 million at the box office. No one expected that. I think we have the exact same ingredients here. We have this curiosity that has been stoked by the president, and a very base level of knowledge about China. So we see the same ingredients potentially creating widespread interest in the United States for this film.
Everyone had welcome indeed. My name is Yuri Mo. I'm from Peking University Alumni Association. I think feel like I know you for many years because you mentioned that the movie started producing 5 years ago. And actually one of your friends, Lin, was my family friend. And she asked me, because of the last war, American Dream made in China. So seems like you had some trouble trying to convince some authority, trying to pass the exam. So I feel like that's a good point. I want to comment that word. I think that's very, very important, very good point you made. American Dream made in China, because that shows both American people and Chinese people, they're pursuing the happiness, that's the same. They have the same goals. I think that's why I say this movie is for global audience, please. So I try to contact Minister of Culture and Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I'm happy to contribute to help. But also, I think I have 2 questions actually. For American audience, you choose a very famous, like Dr. Kissinger, former Secretary of State, Martin Albright. For Chinese, for the ordinary people, how you target those characters? How do you choose those roles as your movie to introduce to the audience? That's my question 1. Second, because your future audience will be in China, do you have any Chinese subtitles? That's my question.
Yeah. We do have a Chinese version with Chinese subtitles, and we might. You're right. This is a film for the global audience, and we might be able to do French subtitles. We're hoping to release the film in some other European countries as well. In terms of the Chinese story, like I said earlier, we had a group of researchers who's been looking at both China, US, and around the world, finding these characters. I know a lot of people will have curiosity about Memo Mata. I'll tell you a story about how we found him. So we found that there's this American football team in Shanghai, and we contacted one coach over there, and Malcolm and went there and had a meeting with him. And he said, there's another guy, American, who's one of the founders you should meet. So we set up this meeting, and we were expecting American, one guy. He showed up with his wife. So right there, you see, as filmmakers, you just know there might be something behind it. And then once we had a cup of coffee, he told us our story, and we basically ditched the very first guy that we met and followed Memo. So in the end, to summarize, a lot of it's based on our criteria, whether they're emotional, whether they, interesting characters that can carry a certain length of the film, and the relevance to our bigger theme. The other thing is we do have luck. Some of the characters we like Memo, and also there are stories that our friends heard about, they told us, so it's a combination of things and how we got these characters and stories in the final film.
I should just say one quick thing, a little shout out for Han Yi. Because I don't speak Mandarin, and I certainly know expert of China, after 5 years I know a tiny bit about the country and need to learn much more. But ordinarily I'm used to dealing with subjects of my films in English. Chinese are quite difficult to put into a film. The Chinese culturally don't open up as quickly, as easily. You need to spend much more time winning trust and faith. And you can really only do that if you speak Mandarin. I mean, you know, a Brit comes along and it's you know, all I can do is nod and smile and be polite. Han Yi was the glue that put this film together, and the fact that we managed to get some extraordinarily candid and honest, if you will, performances. They weren't performances, they were being themselves, but that's really tricky in China. And we managed to do that because they believe in Han Yi, not in me. And Americans are great. You talk to Americans 10 minutes after you meet them, they'll tell you everything if they like you. They're really open. They're lovely. And the Chinese are a whole different kettle of fish, as we say in England. You need to really work to open them, to win their trust, and then they will come. Then they'll be wonderful. But it's a different journey with the Chinese, and so it was quite a different technique that I learned. And basically, what I learned was never argue with the boss, and then we will get the interviews. And so, you know, it was very much a team effort.
One last question. Yeah, that's
Testing. Thank you. Josh Rogan with the Washington Post. Thanks so much for inviting us and making this movie, which found a lot of heartwarming human stories about the U.S.-China relationship. I don't think anyone would object to the idea that citizen-to-citizen engagement is a good thing and that cooperation is preferable to conflict. But I'm wondering if you didn't, why you didn't address sort of what I hear when I talk to people about why there's so much tension and why there's so much concern around America, not just in Washington, about China. And mostly what I hear is that it's not about Chinese people, it's about the actions of the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party. And you know, I get that you didn't want to make this about the politicians and the things that are already in the debate, but when I look at an issue like the Chinese internment of hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities who committed no crime, to me that's a human-to-human issue. Those are people with real relationships with real Americans, family members of Americans. Malcolm, you talk about shared values, similar set of values. What about freedom of religion, freedom of speech?
Stop.
No, let me finish.
Because you know what?
If you'll just let me finish.
Okay.
Thank you. So, what about freedom of religion, freedom of political expression? Isn't that really the clash of values? And if we don't address the Chinese government's actions and their repression of these rights, then how can we really hope to have a meaningful...
I completely agree with everything you're saying. Every single thing you're saying, except about the Uyghurs. Because I didn't know about the Uyghurs when we were making this film. Did you? I don't think so.
It's in the news.
It was not in the news 2.5 years ago.
It just...
Forgive me. So let me finish. Now, I stopped interrupting you. You stopped interrupting me for a second. Everything that you said, I agree with. I don't admire the Chinese government across the board. But you guys at the Washington Post and CNN and ABC, where I used to work, did a very, very good job, in my opinion, of examining all those issues. For us to retread, to reheat those chestnuts, was not going to be very productive. What we decided to do was to do something that you guys weren't doing. Okay? So what we did was we looked at human stories, not at Tibet, not at currency manipulation, not at human rights, because it had been done to death. And I don't think I could have added anything to any.
But they are addressed in the movie, Malcolm, because.
But yes, of course, but only cursorily. Right. He's right about this. I'm not arguing with that. But what I'm saying is to reheat. Someone said to us, we're at the Foreign Correspondents Club in Hong Kong. Why didn't you do Tibet? Why? What was I going to contribute that hadn't already been contributed?
It just makes the movie seem like a one-sided
Okay,
story.
well then, for you have, I respect your opinion, I disagree with it.
I think this is a hugely necessary film. That a story, or several stories, that have not been told. And you guys have never done it. I don't mean you, the Washington Post, I mean you guys, the press. You're very good at reheating those chestnuts and beating China over the head with them. And I don't disagree with you. I don't think they're irrelevant, I don't think they're unimportant, and I do think they need to be addressed, but not by this film.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think, let me just add, I think, the modern incarnation of anti-Chinese sentiment in this country is, an opinion poll after opinion poll says it's driven by the perception of the loss of middle-class jobs in America to the Chinese. And I think one of the things that this film does, without trying to take that, I don't want to make the argument that we didn't lose jobs to China, because we manifestly did. That is part of the process of globalization. What I think was illuminating in this film is we showed that China and China's middle class is experiencing precisely the same exodus of middle-class jobs, just to Southeast Asia and in Africa. And that's a revelation for the majority of Americans. That's something that I think the mainstream press has not adequately covered. And the reason I think that's important is because we have a lot of envy here in this country about China, because the Chinese that come over here are much more well off than the average Chinese. And so we see, there's frankly a lot of envy. And I think we need to at least temper that envy with some level of empathy for what exists. Second example, the 60 million children that grow up without a mother or father. That's a sociological phenomena, the likes of which the world has never seen. Why isn't it covered? Because that will create a better understanding. I mean, Steve Schwartzman says, China's rich and it's poor at the same time. That's exactly right. But we have a perception that they're rich. So this was the focus. You're not going to cover everything. We basically focused on the things that the mainstream media does not cover.
I would just add that I appreciate your thoughtful responses, and I would just add that it's severe restrictions on the press operating in China are contribute greatly to that misunderstanding.
I agree with that.
Something that's
I agree with that. I don't think that's in China's interest at all. I think that creates problems. But I think also a lot of the reporters, that cover China need to spend a little more time in China. And I realize it's not always simple, but I think you got to try harder.
Maybe the ambassador can speed up the visa process.
Yeah, no. I agree. I think that's an issue. The other thing is, I think the Chinese. I think it's very important that the Chinese have a window into America. The Chinese are not trying hard enough in America. They're not, because they have a perception that America is closed. I can remember conversations with Chinese private equity people who told me all about their investments in Europe and Latin America. And I go, well, what about the United States? And their answer is, our money is not welcome here. Well, my message to the Chinese is try harder, because this film shows you that your money is welcome here. You know where it's welcome? It's welcome in places that America has forgotten. It's welcome in the forgotten class, the long-term unemployed, which we show, is a place where Chinese risk capital can be usefully deployed in a way that helps us.
Thank you. Obviously, still a lot of people have a lot of things to say. I'm going to allow two more questions, but I have to keep it really brief. One here.
My name is Peter Reisman. I'm the Managing Director and Chief Communications Officer for Bank of China. I was very impressed with the movie today. It tells a story very similar to mine. I lived in China for 7 years and going back and forth for 25. I think it's an important message. As Bank of China, we actually have two statistics I think are very relevant. We have over 700 employees, and 90% of those employees are actually American hires, local hires. And about 90% of our clients are actually U.S. companies that we support, and let's say we support U.S. economy and support U.S. jobs. In addition to that, we're actually going to send 200 of our employees to see the movie next week in New York. So I think it would be very important for them to understand, as they already work with the Bank of China and see the work that we do here and work in China. I think you've done a phenomenal job. The only question I would submit as a question is I think you should also take this. We were involved in a project not too long ago about the Jews of Shanghai. That was a documentary you probably saw. And we actually sponsored some of that promotion here in the U.S. And we took that also to the university level. And I think this is something that you should probably, I'm sure it's probably on your plan. I'd like to know at the university level for the students and professors.
Let me talk about that. She's organizing.
Yeah. Well, you know, the purpose of this film is to open, we hope, a new round of discussion about the future of the relationship between China and the U.S. And we do want to reach out to the younger generation. So we have plans to tour in both China and the U.S. universities. And we've done here Harvard, USC, and we've done Oxford. We're going to go back to Cambridge, and just to name a few. And in China, we do Tsinghua, Beida, and Wuhan. We're going to tour quite a bit of cities, and that's one of our mandates.
I'm gonna abuse my power as the MC and keep the last question to me. I have a YouTube channel, so I consider me practically peers with you guys. As a filmmaker to filmmaker. I know you don't just influence the work. You work on this so many years. I mean, the work has got to influence you. And looking back to the beginning of the project, what is the most significant transformation that happened to you personally, you know, through working on a film like this? And then my second part is, if we like the film, how do we share the trailer with our friends, and where can we find the show times on social media and things like that?
Well, you can do the second one, because I have no idea about it. But I can tell you on the first part. I've had a lot of difficulties making films in China because it didn't used to be as easy as it is. And when I was first approached, I did have qualms. I did have anxieties about how what comes naturally to me when I make a film in England or I make a film in America. I know that there's a free press. So there's easy access. I thought it was going to be trickier to do it in China. It was not tricky in China. I can attest to the fact that we went where we went. We were never prevented from doing anything. I was quite surprised by that, quite honestly. And I came away from this experience, as I said to our Washington Post colleague, not a fanboy of China, not China right or wrong. There's certainly difficulties. There are certainly things I think it would be wonderful if the Chinese reconsidered, but I do think the one thing that's interesting about the Chinese is that if you constructively criticize what they're doing, they know their society is not perfect. They know way better than we do. And what I would like to do is to think that we could have a relationship where we could both be open to criticism about our own systems. And I came back enormously impressed by the extraordinary forbearance of the Chinese people, the sacrifice of the Chinese people to get where they have got. This renaissance, because it really is a renaissance, as someone said in the film, I think it was Wang Jianlin, he said, it's only in the last 200 years that China hasn't led the world. In technology, in thought, in so many things. And so, but now they're coming back, and I think it's irrational and kind of very ill-considered to not expect them to want to fulfill their own potential. And if that means that they are going to have the biggest economy in the world, so be it. It's not the end of the world. As I said in the film, the rise of China does not necessarily mean the fall of the United States. That's nonsense. And you know, what I would love to see is these two great nations just having a little bit more respect, a little bit more openness, and a little bit more consideration for their own natural cultures, because China is never going to be what America is, nor should we want it to be, because it is so unique. And but I think, as someone at the end of the film, which is why I put it in the film, you know, we don't have to be number one. All we need to do is to have, you know, other qualities that we value, perhaps more than raw power. And I think that's very doable. And I think this film is important because it is not dealing with all those other, which are a very important thing. But you can only have so much of a focus as a filmmaker if you're going to get your message across. And it's, you know, it's been a profoundly moving experience and a very kind of intellectually enriching experience to spend 5 years dealing with China. It is, to my mind, the biggest news story of the 21st century, and it deserves our respect and our attention.
Just to add to your first question, very short, well, we have, you know, the past 5 years, obviously, we're older, in 5 years, we're warm. It's a lot. But to me, as a Chinese, dealing with, you know, the Chinese stories, it's also a re-examining process to look at our own cultural stories. And it's been a great honor to work with this team. And you know, it's not just the three of us on stage; there's a lot of people behind this film. So if you like film and if you'd like to help us spread the word, our website is betterangels.film. It's very easy to remember. It's not .film. And then if you go on YouTube and Facebook, just search Better Angels Malcolm Clarke, and you'll find that link. And please do share with your peers and with your family, with your friends. And as filmmakers, our responsibility is to find a story and try to tell it well. And I think it's up to every one of you together to bring this to a bigger audience, and hopefully we can make some change. And I think, you know, I actually studied journalism. I think as journalists, and we want a message to be heard, we also want our audience to be informed, not just one side, but like a diamond. We have all kinds of sides. You know, you choose to do this one, we choose to do this one, but together we're giving the audience a full picture and let them decide what they want to believe and what they want to see and what they want to learn about the world. So.